I just realized that I said this whole talk and I had not clicked the talk button. So you can all laugh out there along with me. That's what happens in technology. So let me start again. So this is Rob Darrow from iNACOL welcoming you to our webinar. We're the International Association for K-12 Online Learning. We sponsor 2 webinars a month, one for teachers of online and blended learning, and a second one for leaders and those that run online and blended schools. Our September webinars are free, so you can get a taste of our webinars, and then in October begins our fee-based webinars. They're not really that expensive, but that's kind of how we're organized here. So we're glad you're all here with us today. And without further ado, we're going to move into our webinar, a conversation with 2 National Online Teachers of the Year, Leslie Fetzer and Kristen Kipp. So before I get to our 2 speakers today, I just wanted to share with you the format for this webinar is that Kristen and I and Leslie talked about questions that they'd like to answer as far as their the conversation we're going to have here. So I've got a series of questions I'm going to ask them. If you've got other questions that you'd like to ask them, then please type that in the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner. And then, but if, while they're talking, you have some burning question related to the topic they're discussing, just click on raise your hand, and then you can ask the question, or you can type in the question, and we'll do a follow-up question that way as well. So we want to give them plenty of time to share their thoughts, but feel free to either type that in the chat box or raise your hand in the midst of a conversation, and then we can go from there. And Leslie and Kristen, who are much more experienced at using this with students, probably might have some other tips as they're going along. But to start with, we're just thrilled that we have 2 online Teachers of the Year here. And here's Leslie. She's been an online science teacher for the past 10 years. She does course developing and also has a master's degree in chemistry education. So it's great to have an online science teacher. That was one of my parts of my schooling that I didn't do so well in. So I'm excited to hear from Leslie and what she's learned about teaching science online. So Leslie, let me turn the mic over to you, and you can share a little bit about yourself.
All right, well, thank you. Well, I have been an online science teacher for the past 4 going on 5 years, and I've been a science teacher in the classroom and in line combined for the past 10. I currently live in North Carolina in a small town called New Hill, which is right outside of Raleigh, and I have 2 children, ages 5 and 3, and my husband is a police officer for the city of Raleigh. I really enjoy backpacking and water skiing and anything outside, so I'm a little sad that summer is coming to an end, but we've got a few good months left with fall here in North Carolina, so looking forward to that.
Our second speaker here with us today is Kristen Kipp, who was the 2011 Online Teacher of the Year Award winner. And she's an online English teacher, so it'll be great to have each of those different perspectives there. You can see that Kristen's been teaching for over 11 years, is an educational consultant and speaker, has a blog there, and also has an upcoming book where she's written about online teaching and what it's like. And she also has a master's degree in secondary education. So welcome, Kristen.
Hi, everyone. I'm honored to get to share with you today some thoughts on online teaching. I just think this work is so very important, the amazing kids that we get to work with every day. And so I'm really passionate about doing it well and getting to share with other people about, why is this such an interesting field? Why is it so exciting? What's happening? I am an online English teacher and an instructional coach for Jeffco's Virtual Academy, which is based in Golden, Colorado. We take students from across the state, primarily from within our own county, but we also get students from everywhere. So really exciting work that we get to do. I also do speaking at various conferences. I've had the opportunity to travel a lot this summer, actually. One of my conferences this summer was actually in Hawaii, so I got to go to Honolulu and talk with some of the online teachers there, which was pretty fun. I do blog. You're welcome to check that out. And as was just mentioned, I have a book coming out this May, or next May, about basic online learning strategies, both for fully online and for hybrid classrooms. So super excited about that. I would love to share the title with you, but the good folks at Josie Bass who are in charge have not chosen a title yet. But I'm sure you're all on pins and needles to find out what that might be. So I'm really excited to share with you guys today. Thanks.
So we have some insights about what it's like to write a book with that. So the exciting part of a format such as this is that we can all be in different places throughout the United States and still have these kinds of conversations, which is, of course, is a glimpse into what quality online learning and teaching can all be about. So just to get started with our first question, so share a little bit about what caused you to first go into teaching and then what caused you to move into online teaching. And Leslie, I'll let you start, and then Kristen, when Leslie's finished, then I'll turn it over to you, and then we'll see if there's any other follow-up questions along those lines.
Well, thank you. I didn't realize we were going to share professional stuff yet, so I didn't plug my North Carolina Virtual Public School, but that's where I teach. But let me back up to the question. So I actually started teaching as a lateral entry teacher. When I first graduated from college, I had majored with a biology and English degree, or dual major, and so I went into medical writing for the pharmaceutical industry. And I had done that already for a few years as an intern through college, and I did enjoy that, especially enjoyed the salary right out of school. But I just wasn't fulfilled. I was going to spend my hours in an office at the computer all day, which is kind of hilarious because that's what I do now, only from my home office. But you know, the highlight of my interactions was when I got to call a physician and ask for questions about a study or a trial that they had run that I was writing about. So it just wasn't the interaction that I desired. And also, it was kind of like, I equate it to chores, like when you do the dishes, you know, that's a chore that has to be done every single day, and there's not really a real sense of accomplishment for that particular chore necessarily. It's, and you know, something that needs to be done, it contributes, but it just is like, wasn't quite enough for me. And so I had the opportunity to teach chemistry in a rural school, and while I was teaching chemistry for that first year, I also received my master's degree in chemistry education. And I learned a lot teaching chemistry in that school. Learned a lot about teaching, learned a lot about student relationships. So I taught there for 5 years before I moved to North Carolina. And in North Carolina, I taught in the classroom for 2 years before I was hired to teach part-time for the North Carolina Virtual Public School. And I soon realized that I could really reach my students online in a way that I wasn't able to do in the classroom just because of sheer numbers. So I couldn't conduct labs, for example, for 25 to 30 students and give them all the personal attention that they needed to reach them where they were, and that's something that I can do now online. So I was doing both face-to-face teaching and online teaching for a couple of years before I decided to make the jump to teaching fully online when I was given some other opportunities with course development.
Awesome. You know, it's really interesting that both Leslie and I got into teaching not by the direct route. I was a psychology major as an undergraduate, really passionate about helping people, and got into my graduate level work for psychology and just really realized that counseling was not a good fit for me, that I wanted something more hands-on, more concrete. And there's nothing really more concrete than helping someone learn how to read and write and appreciate critical thinking. So went back to school, got my master's and my teaching certification at that point, and then taught in a face-to-face classroom full-time for about 7 years before I moved into online teaching. Like Leslie, I started out doing a little bit of course development and really kind of fell in love with the tool tools. You know, I'm such a tech nerd. I loved making everything organized and seeing this beautiful little grade book with everything coming in and out from my students, and I just sort of fell in love with that and made the leap into full-time online teaching. And once I did that, I think beyond falling in love with the technology, I fell in love with the kids, with these amazing students that we get to work with each and every day, and seeing them succeed, seeing students graduate from high school that wouldn't otherwise do so. That's amazing, incredibly rewarding, and so just absolutely love online teaching, and that the flexibility that it gives both me and my students to be able to do some things that maybe we never really thought possible without those technology tools.
So I'm curious, Leslie and Kristen, have you guys met each other face to face?
I think we both jumped into that. We actually haven't yet. We will this October at the VSS conference, so we're looking forward to that. I know I am.
Absolutely. I loved it. Shortly after Leslie won the award, we had a phone call and were able to sort of swap stories and to talk about tips too for sort of representing the field. And but yeah, I'm excited to actually meet each other face to face finally.
Well, this is exciting then, that we could get you together in this forum, and then you'll get to meet each other face to face and learn more about each other. That's the exciting part of the online world for sure. All right, let's move on to our next question. So what are some of the things you have learned about online teaching that are different from face-to-face teaching?
Okay, I think it's my turn to start. Some things that are different about online teaching. Well, first of all, I think I should mention that there's a lot of things that aren't different. You know, you still have sort of this planning process that you're going through, and grading and building relationships with students. You're just doing it in a very different forum. And because you have a very different forum, it changes your workflow a little bit. So one thing that I think is different about online teaching versus face-to-face is that my workflow looks very different. I'm not governed by a bell schedule, and so I'm not you know, moving quickly, first period, second period, third period, all the way through my day and take a deep breath and go home. It's a very different workflow. So it might be that, you know, on Mondays I am really focusing in on grading and giving kids good feedback, and then on Tuesday I might be focusing on really building some good course content, enriching things, etc. And so my days become very different. As an online teacher, I am able to structure a whole week worth of, you know, sort of my to-do list versus that full day running through the course, the bell schedule. And then I think the other thing is that online teaching, you just have to be so careful about your tone. Because so much of the way that you represent yourself in an online space is through writing and the things that you're showing in your updates, your emails, your text messages with students. And so you really have to walk this fine line of constantly giving students the message, hey, I care about you, I think you're really important, and also I have high expectations, and I'm not going, you know, I'm not going to put up with low quality work, if that makes sense. So I'm constantly walking that line, and it's a little different when you teach face-to-face. You know, I think kids get that you care about them through a different method, but in this case with online teaching, it's all about your writing and reading that message again and again and making sure that your voice is coming across the way that you want it to, because ultimately what you're doing is you're interpreting yourself, who you are as an online teacher, in that digital space, and so it looks a little different.
So I'll jump right in, and I think that something surprising to most people, and something that I had a chance to kind of ease into since I did teach face-to-face and online at the same time. That was my second job for a little while, so I eased into it. But it is more work, actually, in a lot of respects than in the classroom, I think, if you're doing it right. If you're really differentiating instruction for each student, really, like Kristen said, letting each one know that you are there and that you care. She alluded to the hours being different. Certainly they are. I kind of equate myself sometimes to a little fairy in the night, because a lot of what we do is responsive. So we have these rigorous course structures already in place, and then we're changing our instruction based on the feedback that we're getting from students and parents and our other stakeholders. So that change of instruction happens every day. So I might build a new content piece, but I might not start that until 7 o'clock at night because I put the kids to bed. And it might be that I'm going until midnight, or it might be that I'm in the middle of the day and I'm answering emails or text messages and that sort of thing. So the hours are definitely different. And sometimes it's hard to put down, actually, to put down the technology. It's hard to say, okay, here's my personal space. So, you know, that's hard for me because you never want to, when you get going and the reward is so great, you don't want to miss an opportunity to reach a student. And I think that's what's important too, is that online you can sometimes reach the unreachable. You can get that person that's shy in the back of the room that doesn't want to say anything because they have no problem telling you plenty of stuff online. There's something that is positive to them about the anonymity of the computer. And then also, you know, we've able to do amazing things at the North Carolina Virtual Public School, and I'm hearing of pockets of places around the country now that are doing other things also for students with disabilities. And we have a program called the OCS Blended Learning Program. OCS stands for Occupational Course of Study, and that is a North Carolina term for students that would not be successful in a regular setting. So these are students that would not be successful in an inclusion setting. They have very significant, I guess you'd say disabilities. I prefer to say learning challenges because we all have challenges that, you know, somebody's not good at math, that's your challenge. It's just a different degree of challenge for those particular students. But they have had amazing success. And I think a lot of the computer, you know, a lot of the tools available to us, like making sure that everything has read aloud, for example, that's easy. And so you can have a student with a disability sitting at a computer lab and nobody has to know that they're any different. So I think that's big, is being able to reach those students, whether they're shy or they have a disability or whatever their circumstance may be. And then also the opportunities. You know, I was always, and I'm sure Kristen was too, I think you have to be to kind of get into this field, but curious and trying to be innovative and using technology in the classroom. And so that's what brought me teaching online in the first place, was I was already using technology in the classroom, and I thought, oh, I'm going to do this and see what I can pull back into the classroom. I actually never anticipated making that jump to teaching online only. But the tools, there's a huge availability of tools, and they're growing. That list is growing and changing every day. So it's phenomenal. I really enjoy it, and I enjoy the differences. There are a lot of similarities. I agree with Kristen on that. The relationships, what makes a good teacher. Good teaching is good teaching, whether it's online or in the classroom. But those similarities are important as well.
Just to really quickly piggyback on what Leslie said, I think people have asked me before, would you go back to teaching face-to-face? And my answer is always, well, yeah, I would if I had to, but it would look a lot different. I think I've just, as an online teacher, gotten used to things, you know, basic things like a digital Dropbox and being able to give students real-time feedback, and not having to return papers, that I think if I were to move back into a face-to-face classroom, you'd see a lot of those elements still there. Because I've just gotten used to living in that space and realized how much more efficient I am as a result.
So Kristen and Leslie, you both kind of suggested about your workflow. So I think that's an important question. So what if each of you talk about what a normal day, or maybe it's a normal week for you, how do you schedule your time? What's your workflow look like as an online teacher? So let's go down that road for a minute here. So why don't we start with you, Leslie, and then we'll move to Kristen.
Okay. Well, I start my work day, I guess, probably similar to many people. I check my emails, and I'm doing that throughout the day. I also am helping with some development. So I'm a project lead for some courses that we're developing. And so that's always a part of my day too, whether it's editing some of that work that's coming in, or offering some other suggestions. Now as National Online Teacher of the Year, I'm often creating slides or items for a speaking engagement or arranging travel and that sort of thing, which has been really fun. I'm also on an advisory board for Washington, D.C., which is fantastic, and I know Kristen also had the opportunity to meet with Arnie Duncan. So that's kind of in the day as well, doing blogs. I'm actually outlining my own book, so that's part of my day. But the teaching, the part that I love, the part that really drives me and keeps me going, that happens, like I said before, mostly at night. After I have received my communication from the students and from the co-teacher, then I really start. And let me explain that a little bit because I said co-teacher. So I mentioned before it's the OCS blended learning program. So we are pairing an online content teacher, in my case science, with an exceptional children's teacher that's in the classroom. And so we are truly co-teaching. We are planning our lessons together. We are adapting instruction together. She's giving me every single day information about what happened that day, which students need what, and then I am leaving feedback. And one thing I will stress, and I think Kristen kind of mentioned that leaving feedback is an important part of our time, and that's because we leave much more than just good job. You know, you have to be very directive, and you do have to be careful of your tone and encouraging. But what's great though is that you don't have to just, you know, put a grade on a piece of paper. You actually can say, okay, you did, let's look at this. You know, here's a screencast of what you did, and let's look over here. Or here, based on your work, I saw that you struggled just a little bit in this area, so I created an animation for you. Take a look. You know, it's much more robust than your typical grading and feedback that you would see in a classroom. So that's a big part of my day. And then also just, you know, the regular calling parents, calling students, keeping in touch. It kind of happens all throughout the day. It starts early and it ends late, but I can take a minute to put my headset down and go switch my laundry or whatever it is I need to do, drive my kids to school, that sort of thing.
So what time does your day start generally? What time are you generally up, and what time do you generally end your day? And then we'll go on to Kristen.
Okay, well, I'm afraid to answer because I don't want people to say, oh my gosh, I'm never going into online teaching. But I will just say again that I already said I have a problem putting it down. So just keep that in mind. But I wake up at 6:30, get the household around, and I am definitely started working pretty much right off the bat with checking emails. And if it's a good night, I'm in bed by 12:30.
Wow, okay, I can jump in here. There's definitely not a typical day. I think Leslie and I probably have very, very similar work days. I like to keep my communications, especially text messages and emails from students, cleared out on a regular basis. So that means, you know, first thing when I get up in the morning, I'm clearing out all those messages and text messages and making sure that kids get what they need. Kids tend to get stuck if they don't have quick communication. So they might, sometimes kids might email you a question at, say, 2 in the morning when they're working, and then they're like, well, I'm not going to do anything else because I can't answer until my teacher answers. So I try to be really, really quick on emails and text messages with students. So I take care of that first thing in the morning. I always have at least a list of about 3 to 5 things that are sort of my core tasks for the day, and it might say, you know, send way to go emails to my kids who are really doing great, and send out some text messages to my students who are struggling. Another one might say, you know, grade all those English 12 senior projects or whatever. So I have sort of those core tasks that I'm doing throughout the day. And then I wrap up my day definitely by getting all that email cleared out too. Now I've learned in order to avoid burnout, I try to take some really purposeful breaks in the middle of the day. In fact, you know, today at noon I took my kids to the library and we kind of ran that in the middle of the day, but that means, you know, I'll work a little later. Actually, I ran into my boss's boss at the library today at noon, which was an interesting situation because I was like, it's the middle of the workday, but yes, I am at the library. But that's just kind of the way it goes. You can sort of work your workflow around your life, which is really, really rewarding as long as you're being really careful about taking those times that are sacred to you and to your family so that you can have some time to breathe. I've been known to just turn off my cell phone on the weekends, or at least make it so it doesn't check the email, so that I can kind of have a life in addition to this work too.
Yeah, I think most online teachers would agree that the definition of the, quote, workday changes when you teach online. Leslie, there was a quick question in the chat room. Do you want to answer that about how many classes that you co-teach with, and then we'll go on to the next question?
Yes, thanks for giving me the opportunity. I didn't want to just type the answer in because it's a little complex. So these are students across the state from all different schools that are enrolling with us. And so we're never going to combine a student from one school in the same course section as a student from another because of privacy laws. So I probably would say that most of our teachers are working with 25 students, but that could mean that they're working with 2 to 3 co-teachers to make up those 25 students, with each of those 2 to 3 having their own course section, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I can tell that there's more to that question that could go on for a while. So it sounds like an interesting structure that you guys have set up there. So our next question is, so what advice would you have for new online teachers? So I'll let Leslie, why don't you start with that one, and we'll follow up with Kristen.
Right. So advice that I would have would definitely be kind of following up with what Kristen had just said about setting that time aside and making sure that it is sacred. You know, just like when you start teaching a new prep, it takes a lot more time to create lesson plans and to get acquainted. And when you first start online teaching, it's going to take a lot more time because you've got that learning curve. And you need to learn how to work with embed code and how to use this tool or that tool. So I would say don't be afraid to ask questions in addition to setting that time aside for yourself. You know, get yourself a mentor. If you have somebody else that is teaching online, that's a huge resource so that you can ask those questions that you might think they're silly questions, but you can really spend a lot of time getting frustrated with trying out different things when if you ask an experienced teacher, online teacher, they can show you very quickly and you would have saved yourself a lot of trouble.
Yeah, I would definitely echo what Leslie said around finding a mentor, or just I've teasingly called them my water cooler buddies. They're the people that I work with online who I can call anytime I'm just frustrated about something and I just need to vent, you know, and have that conversation. I have those go-to people, and I was really purposeful about you know, choosing who that was, that they're trustworthy and that they can just listen when the need arises. And obviously I do vice versa. We do that. So being purposeful about that. Backing up a little bit, for someone who's considering going into online teaching and not really sure about it, I think first thing I would tell them to do is to take an online course. If you haven't ever done that before, I think it was a real eye-opener for me to realize that online learning is real learning. That sounds crazy, but to be in a course and go, wow, look at all this information that I've learned in this class, just in this online environment, I think it answers a lot of questions, and also it definitely shows you what works and what doesn't work in online learning. If you take, you know, say a community college class and it's not a great online class, well then you very quickly figure out, okay, this is what I don't want to do as an online teacher, or hopefully you get somebody who's really great and you can sort of emulate their style. For me, I took a course about how to be an online teacher or an online facilitator through PBS Teacherline that was excellent and really helped me develop a philosophy of online education. And so I think those are good steps before you even, you know, get to the point of really starting that first online teaching job. And then the other thing is, once you've actually begun teaching online, definitely the point about unplugging is huge. For me, that means I have to shut down my computer and actually close my laptop because otherwise it's too easy for me to get back on and double check things later. So when I'm entering that sort of time that I have devoted to just to being a normal person and not just an online teacher, I shut the computer fully down so that I can just really focus on my kids and my family.
So you both talked about getting a mentor or your water cooler buddies. Could you talk a little bit about, I mean, if you're an online teacher working from your house all the time, how do you get those people? What is it that you did to build that group of people?
Well, at the North Carolina Virtual Public School, we have a really fantastic training program set up. So teachers actually take a semester where they go through a training program where 9 weeks is kind of our philosophies, expectations, that sort of orientation type information. And then the second 9 weeks is where you're actually working in a live classroom in kind of a student-teacher situation. So right off the bat, we pair our teachers with mentors. And then also we have an ELC, or electronic learning community, and we meet on a regular basis. And I have made some fantastic working relationships with the teachers that I work with. They are fantastic. It seems that teachers that teach online really have the right heart. You know, they're the best of the best. They want the technology, they want the good relationships, and so it's been fantastic. And I mentioned in the chat that it seems like online teachers just love to share even more than maybe your regular teachers in a school. You know, hey, look at this new tool I got, try this out, or hey, look, this one crashed my site because it had iframe, or you know, whatever it might be, they're sharing. We share all the time. It's I'm talking to my fellow teachers, I would say, as much as I am talking to my students.
I would echo that in that, I mean, it's really surprising, but I'm actually closer to the staff that I work with now than when I taught in a brick and mortar building. And I think there's a couple reasons for it. One is that we do have face-to-face professional development days once a month. And so that's a great time to kind of connect and look over each other's shoulders and explore each other's classrooms and that sort of thing. The other thing that we've done as a school that I think is helpful is that we make sure that we're all on Windows Messenger during the day when we're working. And it gives kind of that down the hall feeling. So when something's not working, I can go down the hall via IM and ask someone, you know, hey, what's up with this? Or, you know, do you have this student? What's going on with that? And I think that's really helped in developing those relationships too, because you don't feel like you're alone. There's somebody else out there.
Leslie, when you said a minute ago that you talk with these people all the time, we heard Kristen talk about through instant messenger, that's how she's talking to people. What other modes of communication do you have with your mentor? And is there like an official face-to-face meeting that you have, or is it by phone? Or, you know, how do you foster that relationship ongoing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We also have, we use Blackboard Instant Messenger, and that is on all day, all the time. And that is probably the primary way that I speak to the other teachers. We also email, of course, and we'll call each other. We text. It's just a part of what we do. You know, we'll be stirring the pot of spaghetti and texting a teacher or a student. It's just ongoing. So the communication lines are always open. You have to be a good communicator to be a good online teacher.
I like that line, stirring the spaghetti and texting with my colleagues. There you go. Use that for another title of your book at some point. All right, great conversation about this question. And yeah, and Kristen put in the chat room, it's all about being part of the family. And when we were talking about workflow earlier, I think that's one of the things I hear you both saying is that you have the control over how it creates, how the workflow fits in with your family lifestyle, and that's the part that is also enjoyable for you as you go through. So that sounds wonderful. Okay, on to question 4. So could you describe some of your, let's talk a little bit about your content. So we've got a science teacher and an English teacher here. What's your favorite project or assignment within the course that you teach, and what does it look like? I think we'll start with Kristen.
Sure. Well, I'm a huge fan of building community within my classes. I feel like kids should feel like they're a part of a classroom community when they're in there. They should feel like they're in this together. So I really stress things that have student-to-student communication as much as possible. So one of my favorite projects is actually a group project. I love doing group projects online. One of the reasons is that it's really easy to track who did what. So there's not this sort of slacker movement when you have a whole group project and, you know, so-and-so didn't do anything but the teacher doesn't know. Online that just doesn't really happen. So one of my favorite projects is after my students have read, they do this science fiction literature studies. So they're all reading these different science fiction books in these small groups. They develop these really in-depth discussions over the course of the unit, which is about 5 weeks, where the group that's reading 1984 is having this really interesting discussion that goes on for multiple weeks about the various characters and the conflicts and what's this author trying to say, etc. And at the same time, the group that's reading Anthem or Brave New World, they're having this similar kind of conversations. And then at the end of the unit, they actually create a wiki together. And so I tell them, I want you to create, Spark Notes for 1984, but I want it to come out of your own brains. So they create pages for symbols in the novel, themes, interesting quotes, images that are representative of the book. And in the end, we wind up with this really kind of amazing product that shows how in-depth the kids have really gotten to understand this book, all through working together in a small group setting over multiple weeks. It's something I just really couldn't manage when I taught face-to-face, but we get to kind of do it this way, so it's fun.
So this is a tough question for me, actually, because it's an always changing answer, an ever-changing answer. I guess one of my favorite things that is a part of the course from when it was created, I was actually blessed to be on the creative team, and I made this video that was myself signing the steps of mitosis and meiosis. And when I did the video, I thought, oh, well, this will be cool. This will be just a fun way to help them remember. But what's really turned out to be phenomenal about it is the students that are in my classes that are hearing impaired become the leaders then, and they become the instructors and the helpers in their class. And actually, the students are scoring very high in that area on the EOC, according to my teachers. So, but mostly I'd say what's really awesome is the variety. We use all sorts of tools to present information to our students. We can use a cartoon or an animation. We could use a video, we could use a screencast, all sorts of things. And what's really fantastic is that we're allowing the students to use those same tools when they turn in projects. So they are creating Glogsters, they are creating GoAnimates, Vokies, all this stuff to prove what they've learned. And they're loving it. They love the variety, they love the technical skills that they're learning, and it's going to help them in life going forward. But probably, I think I mentioned before that, so I changed my instruction based on each individual student. So for example, probably my favorite example, and if you've heard me speak before, I've probably mentioned it because I just love the outcome, but I had a student named Connor that was in a class, and he loved to run. And he would literally report to me every day how long, hey, I ran 2 miles today or whatever. And so he would just tell me every day about his running. And everybody was learning about evolution. But I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do something so I can teach evolution to Connor through the new idea of barefoot running, the new trend, and the evolution of our feet. And he just loved that and totally took that to the, just ran with it, pun intended. And he just had a fantastic outcome. I mean, he understood terms that people were having, regular honor students were having trouble with, and here he is with autism, and was really, really just doing well. So I just like that we can personalize our projects and assignments for each student, and that can change all the time, which is what keeps it exciting too from a teaching perspective.
Leslie, you want to follow up with the chat room question, and then maybe Kristen, you too can add into that. So the question is there a national electronic working community for all teachers online? So how do you keep in touch with those other online teachers, I think is part of what I hear the question being. But Ligia can add on to that if you'd like. So go ahead, Leslie.
Sure, definitely the INI forums. You'll find other forums out there too. I would just caution, I don't know if any national other than the INI forums, but I would caution you to know that, not every online course is this, they're not created equal. So for example, you hear Kristen and I talking a lot about our involvement with our students and our communication. I mean, 24 hours does not go by when we haven't gotten it, when I haven't gotten in touch with my students. But there are courses out there where it's more of a, click and next. And so make sure that you're you're an online teacher, not a course manager. You won't get the reward otherwise. And so when you're looking for forums, I would just, filter with that in mind.
So I'm glad to hear Kristen and Leslie kind of say what I was thinking, which is join INACOL, and then you can have some of that conversation. You may not realize it, but we do have regional committees in the INACOL organization that meet on a monthly basis where people can compare notes and have conversations such as we're having with this webinar. So I'm glad you guys brought that up. Okay, next question. All right, so this is kind of a multi-list question here, but it kind of gets to the question that a lot of people asked about online learning. So how do you convince skeptics that online learning is a valid approach? And then, of course, the follow-up question to that is, how do you know students are actually doing their own work in an online course? So, Leslie, I'll let you take that one first.
Okay. Well, how do you convince skeptics that an online learning is a valid approach? That one is so fun for me. I love to tell people that have the idea of online learning as that click and next. I love to share with them what it is I actually do and how much we actually communicate. So I think just sharing with them, and when they hear the excitement and they hear those anecdotal stories, that certainly turns a lot of skeptics. But then you have some that they just want to see the data. And this past year, we had 10% of our students with significant disabilities pass the end-of-course test. Now, I know 10% doesn't seem very high, but you need to keep in mind that these are students, again, with significant disabilities. And in addition to that, they're taking the same end-of-course test that the regular students are taking. So 10% actually is phenomenal, and we're looking forward to just growing from there, although they have changed our state tests, and now the students will have their own tests, but that'll just give us even more excellent data. So I think the more that we go into the arena of online learning and blended learning, there is going to be that data. They can't deny it. It's there, and when you hear the students' stories as well, I know a lot of students will, testimonials that you'll hear them say about how this teacher made a difference. I mean, you really get to know your students. So much so that sometimes you are the one, I hate to say it, but saying, okay, they've said that they are going to threaten their lives, or maybe their lives are threatened by somebody else in their family, and you are the one that can intercede because you know them that well. So I would just say, a lot of the anecdotal stuff, but the data is coming. It's definitely coming as well.
Awesome. I think that my number one approach for convincing skeptics that online learning is a valid approach is really sharing stories, the same way that Leslie talked about. I work with some really amazing kids that wouldn't graduate if we weren't there. I have teen moms who, I have one who delivered on the first day of school, and so she is so sweet, was an A/B student beforehand, and is really determined to graduate high school. And so I'm working with her one-on-one to get her through that process. We have students who are elite athletes who travel all over the world. We have students who for whatever reason have health problems that, they're going to be in the hospital, they're going through chemo. They still want to graduate high school on time, and they want to graduate with their classmates. And so we're able to step into that gap for them. And I think that's huge. And we're also seeing some real success. My students, when I do a survey at the end of every course, and ask them, how does this course compare to face-to-face learning? What does it look like? And they hands down always tell me it is at least as rigorous or more rigorous than what they would have gotten in a traditional classroom. And we're seeing really, really great success rates too. We work with a pretty significant at-risk population, and my English 12 course currently has a 90% pass rate. So that's huge for at-risk kids. And at the same time, they're really learning. I'm seeing these huge jumps in their writing abilities, their their ability to think critically over the course of a class. So those stories definitely carry weight, and like Leslie said, we're getting that data. It's coming. And the other question, how do you know students are doing their own work in an online course? I think there are a couple approaches to that. One is that I know my kids very, very well. That their very first assignment in my class, they're telling me about themselves and their sort of reading history and their past experiences with courses. And through that, I get to know their skills very quickly. You can't plagiarize that, right? A story about yourself. And so I get to know their skills pretty quickly from that, and then can very easily see if somebody's cheating. I always tell my students, you know, it's really easy to cheat in a lot of online courses, but it's also really easy to catch. And so definitely that's a deterrent. I have conversations with students about plagiarism, about the importance of doing their own work, that, you know, the world cares about their skills, and so they need to develop those skills, and they really respect that. The other thing is that I'm really careful in my courses to create non-Googleable assignments. So assignments that are not easily searched, and I get more valid responses from students out of that too. So an example of that might be, instead of, you know, write me an essay on the significance of color in The Great Gatsby, it might be, I want you to have Gatsby have a conversation, a fictional conversation with Juliet from Romeo and Juliet. What kinds of things are they both going to care about? What kind of things are going to come up in that conversation? That's a non-Googleable assignment. It's hard to cheat on that assignment. And I switch that assignment up every time I teach it so that it doesn't become Googleable. And as a result, I feel like I have a pretty good feel for my students' skills, and that they're actually doing their own work.
Right, and I would just second that you know your students. You know when your students are doing their own work because you know them. And also for us at the North Carolina Virtual Public School, we really work to have projects-based assessments. So while we do have some of those multiple choice type things, they generally are just checking the student's knowledge for themselves, not necessarily contributing to the grade, whereas some of the more project-based assessments are.
So Leslie, talk a little bit about how you, quote, get to know a student in the first week of class so that you understand the kinds of work that they do. And then if you wouldn't mind following up, you made the comment earlier about course manager versus online teacher. If you could also comment about that after how you get to know students, and then maybe Kristen has something else to say after that.
Sure. I would say those two things actually tie in together, how I get to know my students and how I'm a teacher and not a manager. I think the difference is that I do know my students. I am grading anything that comes in within 24 hours and giving that more robust feedback that I talked about before. So I'm getting to know them purposefully in the beginning with the conversations that I have. I kind of keep asking questions until they give me an answer where I can come back the next conversation and ask about it. So for example, if I'm talking to a student and he says, well, hey, I have a football game on Friday, then the next time that I talk to him, I'm going to say, well, how did that football game go? So I just take kind of copious notes so that I make sure until I get to the point like you do in the classroom where those first couple weeks you're learning names, but eventually the names and the faces, you don't have to write things down to remember. It's the same thing with online. Once you've had a few conversations, you don't have to write everything down. But we do actually to keep records, just because that's part of what we do also for our evaluations, which was a question that was earlier, and if I will, I'll touch on that in just a minute. But I think just keeping that communication going, don't let a lapse happen. If a student, I call it, goes rogue or disappears from the online class, more than 2 days in a row, then you need to do some roping in and see what's going on. And it might be it's a good student. I might just be like, hey, I'm just checking in. I know you're doing a great job. But just get to know them, because then you can take those likes and dislikes and incorporate them into the content. And then when you do that, you're bridging that content to the student's life, and that makes a huge, huge difference. And that is the difference between a teacher and a manager. As far as evaluation, we are evaluated at the NCVPS just like we were in the classroom. In fact, more so, because in the classroom, the brick and mortar school, the teacher or the your peer teacher doing the evaluation or your supervisor, your administrator, they pop in every now and again, and oftentimes it's scheduled, and then maybe there's one unscheduled during the year, but they really don't see the day-to-day happenings in your classroom. Whereas online, it's there for your supervisors to see at any time. And it's very structured. We have a rubric. We're evaluated on how often we're making our communications. There's expectations surrounding that. How good our feedback is. How both aesthetically pleasing, is it working, but that extra content that we're building in to, as I call it, chunking the content, so we're breaking it down into manageable pieces or into chunks. Those things that we're creating or that we're using to teach, the quality of those, and then we're also assessed on our feedback and how well we're differentiating for each student. So are we making a difference personally for each student from a content perspective? So that's how we're evaluated at NCDPS, and I'll turn it over to Kristen to share with her what their evaluation strategies are.
Sure. I think evaluation is something that we've struggled with as a district because we're an option high school within a traditional school district, and so we've had to ask questions like, well, what is if all of our teachers, our online teachers, are evaluated according to a traditional rubric, a traditional teacher rubric, the same one that every other brick and mortar teacher is evaluated on, what does that look like? How is an online teacher's work different? And so I think we're still going through that. I think some of our observations happen in our live sessions or webinars that we teach, but that's really a small portion of our workload, and so we're definitely brainstorming strategies for getting those valid evaluations.
So I have other questions, but I wanted to, for the last 10 minutes here, open it up to the people who are on this call to ask any questions that you might like. There was one question about, so how do you do online science with hands-on experiences? So we'll give that one to Leslie in just a second. But if anybody else has other questions that you'd like Kristen and Leslie to address, now would be the time to either type them in or grab the mic.
Well, while the questions are coming, I can jump in and answer that. We have online virtual labs, but we also do hands-on labs. So I mentioned before that we are a blended environment. So I might send a lab that they're going to do in the classroom, and I might send that with a screencast of myself doing the lab. So we're doing both hands-on and virtual labs. But there are some great virtual labs out there also, and there are some labs that they can do with just household materials. So so we do both, but I don't find it challenging to teach science online. In fact, I think it would be harder to teach like a foreign language, I would have thought. And then I talked to my friend that does teach foreign language, Spanish, online, and she says, oh no, it's great because we can do all this audio stuff. So I really think that we can teach just about anything online. We just have to be creative in our approach.
So I think I'll just have to say that waiting for questions online is harder to give people time to think about it than it is in a face-to-face setting. The silence can kill you, right? So I'm going to wait a little bit more here, and yeah, the teacher pause, exactly, and see what else comes up here. Anything else? Because I do have some backup questions I don't think I even shared with Leslie and Kristen, but of course they'll have some great answers.
Yeah, Judy, actually, we kind of do. So every day we're responsible for putting up what we call an announcement, but announcement is not the word that I think should be used, because announcement sounds like, oh, you have a test on Friday, that's an announcement. But an announcement in our online world is that chunked teaching piece, that content piece. And it does, kind of work like a bulletin board. You change it every day, and unlike every month, which you would for a bulletin board, but you change it, it reflects the content that you're teaching. It might link out to a video that's relevant, or it might provide some extra practice. It might say, hey, here's a trivia question, message me your answer. but that is the first thing that they see when they log in, and so it's important that that's both engaging and then relevant content-wise. So it kind of is.
So it looks like, let's see, I think it's Lene asked a question, which is one of my final questions for these two, but I think that's a good question since you brought it up. So she asked, what do you see as the future of education here? She really asked, is the future in blended and fully online, or how's that all going to mix together and play out in the future? So Kristen, what if you take that first, and then Leslie can follow up.
Absolutely. I think yes and both. In my ideal world, we create a lot of different educational opportunities for kids. I don't think fully online necessarily works for every student, but I see a world in which for those that it does, they have the opportunities that they need, really robust high-quality online learning, fully online learning experiences. But I also see blended learning really transforming a traditional classroom such that, we may not recognize the kinds of tools that kids are using 10 years from now in that traditional brick-and-mortar classroom to engage with each other and engage with the teacher. I definitely see a space for that too. So I hope it's both.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that we don't know for sure, which is exciting in itself. I have taught both fully online and the blended, which I've been describing most of the webinar today. And I will say that for my own children, I hope that they get the opportunity to learn in a blended model, just personally. But I think that unknown is exciting, and who knows, it could be something completely different than either of those. We just don't know, but I see blended as where it's going in the recent future, and I really am excited about that. I see the success that my students with disabilities have, and I think, wow, if every student was learning this way, we would really not have the educational crisis that we do.
So at this point, I'd like to ask Kristen and Leslie just to share any final thoughts or reflections based on your interaction with each other, or anything else you'd like to share before I close things out here.
Sure. I just think, first of all, I love listening to Leslie and being inspired by her passion for kids. So I'm really excited to hear more of that today, and definitely to get to meet face-to-face. I think sometimes people look at online learning and they're just overwhelmed by the possibilities and not sure where to start. And I think that we all have to take a deep breath and realize that it's baby steps. It's one step at a time. What can I implement today in my face-to-face classroom, or what can I do in my online classroom to make it better, to make it more engaging for kids, one step at a time, and we're all gonna get there and really be amazed where we are even a few years from now with online education.
Right. Well, this has been really fun for me. Lately, I've been doing a lot of speaking engagements, and this was just kind of, little preparation. I knew the questions ahead of time, but I tried not to look so that I wouldn't script them, and I think that probably came through with my falling over my words a few times. But it was fun. It's fun to talk about how I got into it and to hear how Kristen started. And I would just encourage you, the question that was asked, well, how can you connect with other online teachers? Yes, do. Because I think that the more that I've had the opportunities to hear from Kristen and from other online teachers across the country, it's exciting. It's exciting to hear what we're doing. And I think we're really going places with education. I think we are going to see some steps and some successes in regards to that crisis that everybody talks about. Because when they talk about the crisis, I think, really, that's not what I'm experiencing anymore. It's not. It's exciting.
Thank you, Leslie and Kristen. Boy, what a privilege it's been to listen to the both of you talk about your craft that you guys have perfected, and I certainly understand why you're both Teachers of the Year. As far as iNACOL, just as a quick way to end things here. So we do have ongoing webinars. Our membership update is tomorrow. You can go to our website and see that. I'd appreciate it if you take a minute to fill out the webinar evaluation link, which I'm putting in the chat room for the third time because I really wanted to make sure people saw it. Know that through iNACOL we have the annual Virtual School Symposium, which is coming up October 21st to 24th. And both Leslie and Kristen mentioned that online learning educators just seem to be willing to share. And I can speak from my experience in growing up in my journey in online learning that attending the Virtual School Symposium was always the highlight of the year in interacting with my colleagues in online learning, and everybody is so willing to share their ideas and what they're doing. So yeah, I know it's kind of a oxymoron in some ways. Online teachers have to attend places face-to-face. Well, yeah, what we do know now is that face-to-face interaction, there is a place for that in addition to online. So I hope that you'll join us there, and I appreciate everybody that's been on here. And thanks again to Kristen and Leslie. It was outstanding being here with you. So with that, I'm going to close this up and thank everybody here for attending, and hope to see you next time.